The real reason your startup isn't growing is probably something you've been walking past every time you try a new channel. I have this founder that I work with, let's call him Jesse, and he's been running outbound for 6 months. And from what I can see, the team is doing the right things. They're prospecting, sending thousands of emails. The copy is good. The sequences are running. Everything looks like it should be working, but nothing is actually converting. So when he came to me, he had already made up his mind. He said, Farzad, outbound doesn't work for us. But it was clear to me that he was wrong. And after having coached hundreds of founders through this exact same moment, I can tell you that that conclusion is going to be what he comes up with every time he tries something new. He has no idea that this pattern has been and will continue to follow him everywhere he goes. And I'm going to show you exactly how this happens, why it's almost impossible for most founders to catch when they're inside of it, and the shift that I've seen that changes everything. So stay with me as we go through this. So here's the real problem. The pattern I see over and over: a founder runs a channel, they get bad results, they draw a conclusion about that channel, and then they move on to the next thing. So let's say, for example, they run ads for 2 months and then they get nothing. So they're like, oh, ads don't work. Or they try content for 6 months and then nothing moves, so content doesn't work. They run outbound for a quarter and nobody replies, so cold email is dead. Each time, they're taking this very, very complex thing and they're collapsing that into something that can be said in one sentence. And that sentence hardens into a belief that follows them every time they try a new channel. Listen, cold email doesn't work is not a conclusion. What the data actually says in Jesse's situation is cold email didn't work for you, the way you executed it, targeting the people you targeted, was the message you wrote over the time frame you ran. These are variables, and simplifying them into one verdict about how things work is how founders waste years of time. So think about how many variables actually determine whether or not cold email works, and keep that in mind, because the list I'm about to give you is not even complete. So let's go through even more variables here, right? There's the quality of companies of your list. There's whether you're emailing the right people. There's the subject of your email. There is whether the copy in your website matches what your email says. There's, the copy of the first sentence of your email. Is your domain warmed up and are your emails actually going into the inbox? There's the quality of your value in that first sentence. There's how your follow-ups are structured, or what you're actually asking them to do at the end. Something as simple as asking interest as opposed to saying, let's book a time, can make a huge difference, depending on your audience, depending on your offer. There's even people like me who the first thing they do when you email them, I'm going to go on your website, I'm going to look up reviews, I'm going to go on Reddit. Everyone is different. And there's endless variables for us to optimize. So when a founder comes to me and tells me cold email doesn't work, what they're actually saying, what they're telling me is that they tried to change 1 or 2 variables, they got bad results, and then they're just like, oh, this whole approach is broken. And what they end up doing is they carry that same belief, that same way of thinking, that pattern into ads, content, partnerships, or whatever else they try next. That mistake is going to follow them. So let me take you back to Jesse. So when he came to me, we sat down and we actually tried to diagnose what happened here. And what we found by going through every single possible thing that could happen, it was a really top-down first principles approach, was that there's really 2 things that were wrong of the dozens of variables we looked at. First, they were targeting enterprise companies, and that's because that's what is in vogue, that's what their investors tell them, but their product really was made for mid-market, right? When we were first building that product, mid-market customers were the ones who responded. So here they are trying to sell a product to enterprise that was not what enterprises want, because it wasn't solving problems for them. Frankly, they were just knocking on the wrong door, and for 6 months, just because they were doing that, just because they were told to go after enterprise, they were wasting their time. Second, every email he was writing led with features, right? So it was like, oh, our company helps you do this. Our company manages that. But the buyers do not care about your features. They care about the problems they have and why your solution is better than what they already have. How is it more effective than the things that they're already doing? Now, thankfully, what Jesse is building, the problem is painful enough where people pay attention. But let's imagine the problem wasn't painful, right? People wouldn't even respond. And you'd say, oh, cold email doesn't work. The reality is your problem, just no one cares about. Or the solution you came up with, no one cares about. So at the end of the day, those were the only 2 variables that were broken inside his channel, but they were not the ones he tried. So we ended up just redoing the targeting criteria. Our prospecting was done differently. And then, of course, we ended up writing the email copy differently. And it was focused on those buyer outcomes, not on features, the things that the buyers actually wanted. When we ran that sequence to the new list, we saw that reply rates went up and meetings started coming in. And here's what Jesse told me after all that. He said, I was so close to shutting down that whole outbound operation and hiring a content person. And when I asked him why content, he just told me that's what he was seeing on LinkedIn, which I thought was funny. So listen to this. He wasted 6 months and almost abandoned something just because no one on his team stopped to ask specifically what was broken. And instead, they were just focused on solving like a million different things that they heard from their investors or their friends or they saw on LinkedIn. Now, here's the uncomfortable part, because most founders I push on this realize that there's something that they weren't expecting. When I sit down with founders to diagnose their challenges, most of them realize that they cannot answer foundational questions clearly to begin with. So what I mean by foundational questions, I mean, who actually wants this product, the service you're selling? And I mean like specifically, not, oh, we sell to mid-market companies with 200 employees. No, I mean, who in that realm wants it so badly enough right now to stop what they're doing and pay attention to the cold email from someone like you who they've never heard of? What do you do that solves it better than every alternative out there? And what I'm looking for here is the honest answer, not what feels good or what you told your investors or what you tell your team, because that honest answer requires you to slow down and really question the things you're doing and building and ask yourself genuinely, what do we do better than anyone else? Why would someone choose you? And the answer you're looking for there is why they actually would, not why you think they should, which is what most founders fall into. So most founders can't answer those clearly. And the reason that those questions don't feel like work, because work is supposed to feel like motion. It's about sending something, running something, building something. The myth is that this is what founders look like when they're working. That's what they see on LinkedIn. No founder on LinkedIn is like, oh, I sat around today for 6 hours and thought about how to write one sentence differently about our copy. That doesn't feel like work. So yeah, sitting down and genuinely asking who really wants this, that feels like thinking. That feels like something you should already know, like something you should have done before the real work starts. And in Jesse's case, he was 1.5 years into the company. He should already know this. That's hard to admit that you don't. But those questions, I would argue, are the real work, the most important work. If you can't answer those questions clearly, you're going to have downstream issues because you're just guessing, right? You're guessing the list, you're guessing the messaging, you're guessing the targeting, and that's how you end up wasting 6 months and you wonder why nothing stuck. And here's the thing that should concern you the most. The founders who stay stuck the longest, I find, are usually the ones working the hardest, running the most experiments, trying the most channels. The problem, I think, is the questions they're asking after every experiment. They ask themselves, did this work? Most of the time, it's not going to work. But instead of asking themselves, did this work? They should really be asking themselves, what is something that was broken in what we tried? What specifically broke? What didn't work? Was it the list? Was it the messaging? Was it the offer? Was it the timing? Was it our website? One of those variables failed, probably not all of them, but you'll never know if you're not going to stop long enough to find out, right? If you believe that we're just going to move on, we're going to keep going. You have to sometimes slow down to find these things out, to find out what broke, test that assumption the next time around. So if you don't slow down long enough to really find out what was the thing that was broken, you're going to carry that same crappy assumption into the next channel, that same way of thinking that's going to cause you to misread data, because almost everything you try at first is going to fail. It's not going to succeed. So you can't fix what you haven't correctly identified. Everything you try before you fix the diagnostic process just gives you more data that you're just going to misread. So before you kill the next channel, I just ask you to stop. Go back to those 3 questions. Who actually wants this? What do you do better? Why would someone actually choose you? And I want you to give that honest answer, the version you'd give to me after we sat around and talked about this, not the version you're giving to investors or your marketing team. Because the reality is that if you cannot answer those questions clearly, simply, in 1 or 2 sentences, that is the real work that you need to be doing. A new hire, a new campaign, a new channel, none of that's going to change the outcome if that foundation is broken, right? Where every assumption, where every strategy, where every execution comes from is broken, yeah, it's going to fail. The only variable that actually moves things is clarity, and clarity that you can bring about what needs to happen. So if you recognize yourself in this, that you've tried 1 billion channels, none of it works, you keep moving on, it's not clear to you what's going on. The gap between seeing the patterns and changing it is exactly the type of work that coaches do with founders. And I'm offering free calls to the first 5 people who click on the link in the description to go through this together, right? No sales, none of that crap. We're going to go straight into your tactics, what you're doing, why they're not working, and enumerate specifically what next step you need to do. And if you're one of those founders who wants to think more clearly and more deeply and get away from this bullcrap hustle culture, and you want to approach your business from a scientific, thoughtful perspective, then please subscribe. I'm going to be making a lot more of these videos.